If you're within a few years of retiring, the statement that showed up this month is probably one of the best that you ever got. The biggest number you've ever seen next to your name. Now, that's not luck. You saved through 2000, you saved through 2008, you saved through 2020. Most people didn't, but you did. So nothing I'm about to say is a criticism of how you got there. But let me ask you something. When was the last time anybody showed you what's actually inside the funds that you own? Not the balance, but what's in there and how much of it is in how few places. Because something changed while you were getting here, and it didn't require you to do anything at all. You're less diversified than you were 10 years ago, and you never made that decision. I understand why this one is hard to hear right now. When the number is up, nobody wants to hear about risk. So let me be clear about what this is not. Now, I'm not predicting a crash. I don't know what the market does next, and neither does anybody who tells you that they do. Here's what I do know. I was on Wall Street in 2008, and what I remember isn't the numbers on the screen. It's the calls. People had been told for years that they were diversified. Reading their own statements out loud to me, line by line, trying to understand what they were actually holding in the same week that they needed to sell it. Now, that's the worst possible week to really learn it. Right now is a great month to learn it. So here's what everybody knows. The S&P 500, which is the benchmark, is the definition of diversification. It's 500 companies, different industries. If one goes bad, you own 490 others. It's a core holding in a huge number of retirement accounts. And just by the index became the most repeated piece of financial advice over the last 30 years. And that advice made a lot of people, including a lot of my clients, a lot of money. But there's a word in there that most people skip right past. It's weighted. Now, you don't own 500 equal slices. You own each company in proportion to its size, which means as a handful of companies get enormous, they quietly take up more and more of what you actually own without anybody buying or selling a thing. Here's what that actually means in plain terms. At the end of last year, the 10 largest companies in that index made up close to 41% of it. Now that figure moves with the market. That's the neighborhood. And there's a reason nobody ever told you that. It isn't the reason you'd assume, and I'll get to it. Now, a decade earlier, that number was about 19%. And at the peak of the dot-com era, the moment we still use as the example of a market that got too narrow, it briefly touched around 27%. So by this measure, index today is more concentrated than it was back then. And it happened gradually enough that nobody ever got a notice about it. That's what I want you to sit with. Now, you own 500 companies. You always have. But roughly 40 cents of every dollar now sits in 10 of them. And the year you were most exposed to those 10 is the same year your statement looked the best it had ever asked. So why did nobody tell you? Because technically nothing happened to you. There was no transaction, no decision, nothing to sign. There was no event to report, so there was no letter to send. The risk in your account changed without ever generating a piece of paper. And there's one more place to look. If your 401k money sits in a target date fund, which a majority of them do, the kind named after the year that you plan to retire, you should know that those are not all built the same way. Every fund family uses its own mix. Some hold broad U.S. stock index funds carrying heavy exposure to those same 10 companies. Others use different benchmarks, active managers, international stocks, other asset classes entirely. I'm telling you, the retirement year on the label doesn't tell you what's inside of it. You have to open it up and look. I sat with a couple a while back, both in their early 60s, and the husband said something that I'd thought about since. He said, I've been in the same 3 funds since 2011. I haven't touched a thing. And he was right. He hadn't. That was the whole problem. He thought standing still meant staying the same. These are people who followed the advice exactly as it was given to them. Bought the index, held on, didn't panic. Every single thing the industry told them to do, they did. And the concentration underneath it changed anyway. Now, that shouldn't be how this works. Here's what I want you to actually do with this. It takes about 20 minutes, and I call it the top heavy test. So step 1, find out what you actually own. Pull up your largest retirement account. Find the fund. Look for the top 10 holdings. Now, every fund publishes it, usually on the first page of the fact sheet. Now write down that percentage. Step 2, do the same for every other account. Then find your overlap number. Most people have 3 or 4 accounts and assume that they're spread out because they're at different companies. Write down the top 10 in each one, then compare the list. Count how many names show up on every list. Now that's your overlap number. If it's 7, 8, 9 of the same names in every account, you don't have 4 positions. You have 1 position held 4 times in 4 different envelopes. A low number isn't proof you're diversified. Plenty of other things can still move together, but a high number is a flag. And it's a flag you can find in 20 minutes without anybody's help. Step 3, count what isn't in those 10 names. Add up the money that has nothing to do with the concentrated stock. Money market, bonds, anything you could spend next year without selling a share of those 10 companies. Then divide it by what you spend in a month. That gives you a number of months, and that number answers the only question that really matters here. If those names had a bad first year while you were taking money out, how long could you leave them alone? Now, I'm not going to hand you a target. The right number really depends on your pension, your Social Security, how flexible your spending is, and what else, of course, that you hold. That's the conversation, not the worksheet. But the number itself tells you something the worksheet can answer, whether a bad stretch would put you on the market schedule or leave you on your own. Now, this is step 1 of my life-tested retirement system. And I simply call it, it's a reality stress test. In plain terms, we take your plan and deliberately break it before life gets the chance. So you find out what happens, let's say on a Tuesday afternoon, with your income still coming in instead of in the middle of the week that you will remember for the rest of your life. Now, we're not forecasting. I have no idea whether those 10 companies will have another great decade or a terrible one. That's not the point here. And anybody who claims to know is selling you something. The point is that your plan should have an answer either way. And most plans have only been tested against one of those 2 futures, which of course is the good one. What it feels like when it's done right, you stop caring quite so much about what the headline says. Not because you stop paying attention, because you already know what happens next in your own house. That man who told me he hadn't touched anything since 2011, he wasn't wrong to hold on. Holding on was right. He just never checked whether the thing he was holding was still the thing that he bought. So look at your statement. Enjoy it. You earned it over decades through 3 crashes that most people fled. Then ask the second question. Because in 25 years, I watched 2 kinds of people read a good statement. Some of them ask, what's underneath it? Everybody else feels thin. On a good day, those 2 people feel exactly the same. On a bad one, they don't. Standing still isn't the same thing And a plan that's only been tested against the decade that just happened hasn't really been tested. If you want help looking at what's actually underneath your accounts, a general example, yours. Go to jonathanpeters.net and schedule a retirement resilience assessment.